these presentations are going to be available. They're being recorded and they will be available on the website later on, so that if you and your colleagues have missed something, that's it. These have been increasingly covered in terms of training, and the training is now a legal requirement. Most people don't seem to have had the necessary training on moving dangerous goods. Basically, anything which has got a UN number is covered by the regulations. And anybody who has been trained should have a dangerous goods transport certificate telling so that they can produce it when somebody has asked for it. The way to find out if a product has a UN number is to look on the safety data sheet. For those of us who are somewhat older, it used to be called the material safety data sheet, but everything is shortened these days. But it's section 14 of your SDS that tells you whether or not the product is classified. There are some surprising exceptions, like dry acid is not classified, but all the liquid acids are. In 2019, products containing dangerous goods, such as some of the heat pumps, are then defined as dangerous goods. Here's an example, UN 3252, difluoromethane, which is also known as refrigerant R32. The heat pump itself has a UN number, and then it goes on to say it's an article containing flammable gas R32. In November 2023, Department for Transport updated their guidance on the retention of dangerous goods training records, and employers must keep records for a minimum of 6 years and make them available to the employee and for anybody who wants to make sure that their records are up to date. The actual ADR document does say in section 1.3.3 that the employer must keep those records and the employee has to have access to it. And records of such training should be verified on commencing new employment. The ADR, which is the book that covers, it's 2 actual volumes, which covers training, shows you what training has to be done, what the general awareness is, and then there's function-specific training to make sure that the appropriate training is given to the people in their different functions. If goods are going by land and sea, then the sea takes preference because it's considered more dangerous, and that is called multimodal transport operations. And the important wording is shall receive training, which means it's compulsory. So that is the law, and there are all the references here on the screen now. You can see the general awareness training, and then the function-specific training and safety training. all these different types of training are appropriate to the people who are working in the warehouse, because you've got to be able to have your goods delivered to the warehouse, then stored there, and then taken out into the vans or the lorries. Most people are going to be using vans for the final transport. There's a whole passage which you can read here on the scope of the regulations and making sure that people have the appropriate training for their undertaking. It doesn't matter what class of goods you've got. They're all classified as from number 1, explosives, to number 9, miscellaneous. But you still need appropriate training, and you may think that explosives are more dangerous, but in fact the class 6.2 of the category, I think, which is the different bioterrorism or bio regulations, they are potentially more hazardous. And then, of course, you've got class 7, which is radioactives. But we're not stopping to look at all of those today. Basically, the safety training is important, and that's the one that most people haven't had in our industry. They've tended to ignore it. And unfortunately, there haven't been a lot of prosecutions to make sure that things are being done properly. But there are spot checks on the vehicles, and the police are not unintelligent. They know that if they see something that's connected with swimming pools or spas, that they can be fairly sure that those people will not have had the training which they should have done. And of course, they can ask the employer or the employee or the van driver for a record of his training, because at the end of the day, what we're wanting to avoid is this. And here you can see at the front of the picture, the front of the van there, and that picture was taken just outside Salisbury, on the plain rather than in the city, to just demonstrate what can go wrong. And that was a good illustration of what we're trying to avoid, because people tend to take a fairly casual attitude to the training they're getting. Refresher training is also a requirement periodically, and that's probably after 2 or 3 years, and that takes account of the changes to regulations which come in every 2 years, and they have a 6-month lead time into the regulations. But of course you can't do that with the sea, because computers can't cope with the 2 different sets. So it's up to the shipper when he decides to update to the latest regulations. The Department for Transport has stated recently, because they've been having some changes themselves in terms of transport-related unloading and loading requirements, and more people are going to be caught in the regulations due to an interpretation of the scoping of it. This is the document that you should take note of, the DFT's interpretation of what is in the dangerous goods. This is an extract from the transportation documents, and you'll see, doesn't work the pointer, sorry. It did with an old-fashioned screen, but it doesn't with these new digital screens, television-type screens. But this lists for the pool chemical people, it's categories 2 and 3, which say how much of what you can carry, and it's 333 kilos of class 2 or 1,000 kilos, not exceeding, to give it the full wording, not exceeding 1,000 kilos of transport category 3. And that means things like sodium hypochlorite, and 1,000 doesn't make any difference whether it's litres or kilos from the point of view of the regulations. So you can carry 25 litres of sodium hypochlorite, and you're outside the transportation categories. So, and certain products are such as empty containers, or there's no such thing really as an empty container, it's an unfilled container, because an empty container can still contain a few mils or fractions of a litre of product, so they call it an unfilled container, and those are all done. But products like calcium hypochlorite are transport category 2, so you're limited to 333 kilos of that on your vehicle. Limited quantities, these are referring to the quantity of chemical in the container, and a lot of products that we use in our industry only have you're allowed to carry as an LQ 5 kilos or 5 litres, and that is not regulated for road transport, but you still need to have had the training for the carriage of it. So even if you keep under the LQ thresholds, you still need to have had the training, and a lot of people are not cognizant of that. These are the symbols that indicate LQ. It used to be very helpful, and in the boxes it said LQ, but that was considered far too helpful, and so they've just got these diamonds which are blacked out at the top and bottom, white central panel, nothing in it except when it was going by air that has the letter Y, because that was the nearest they could get to a model aeroplane, and that has been around for a long time now. The small load limit exemptions are, we've seen on that chart earlier, they are not exceeding 333 kilos if it's all transport category 2, or 1,000 kilos transport category 3, and that's only for road. And if you've got a mixed load, then you multiply the transport category 2 items by the number 3, and so 3 times 333 is roughly 1,000. So that will tell you how much of that you can have. And if you've got mixed products, you have to do a little calculation as to making sure that the whole thing stays under the 1,000 figure. Although this booklet is dated April 2012, it's still applicable, and it does cover various transitional procedures and reporting, but we try and make sure that everybody is fully aware of what happens. There are certain substances which are considered to be explosive precursors, such as acetone and hydrochloric acid in excess of 10% weight, or sodium hydroxide in excess of 12%. We did have a lecture by a policeman who's seconded to the Home Office, who was up here on Tuesday, but he'll be very pleased to answer any questions if your DGSA can't. You also have a legal duty to report any suspicious transactions. That's anything that's business to consumer or business to business. And there's a National Police number, 0800 789 321. Or you can have email to chemical.reporting@netpolice.co.uk. Oh, sorry, shouldn't have put the co in there. Another useful website is legislation.gov.uk. What we want to have is that will tell you what to search for if you look for a particular chemical, and it'll tell you what legislation applies. What we want to avoid is having a disorganized pool shop or pool store. You've got to be careful about the members of the public coming in to see you. They should not be able to access the chemicals and walk out with them. We have on the SPATEX stand there the ability for anyone involved to get their CSCS card to make sure that they are properly trained tradespeople. Everything goes back to these transport of chemical dangerous goods, road or rail, in 2009. They are available off the Department for Transport regulations. The government don't seem to have any word processors or computers that they can consolidate the regulations into one publication. So we have to put up with that. There is a lot of information available on the web at www.gov.uk/security/dangerous goods. And remember, you can be persecuted or prosecuted if you're a person involved in the carriage of dangerous goods and you're shown not to have taken reasonable steps to ensure that unauthorized access to those dangerous goods is prevented. And there's also a requirement that if you're carrying dangerous goods, the vehicle should be kept locked at all times. So your service people should always make sure that they have locked their vehicle on site. There's also the Explosive Precursors and Poisons Act, but in my opinion, the government's always closing the stable door after the previous horses bolted, but they're always one thing behind. But there's a requirement now for supply chain notifications, and this is under the Poisons Act of 1972, which is before some of you were born, I would hesitate to think. Others not so. But you've got to look at all the legislation that comes at you from different directions. And it does define what is an explosive precursor. And there's lots of information that has to be downloaded to make sure that your employees are suitably informed. There's all sorts of regulated business-to-business sales, but the information's all there on the website. There are certain things like hydrogen peroxide. If you're selling it at more than 12%, that is considered to be an explosive precursor these days. So all these people who bleach their hair aren't allowed to have more than 12% strength. That's what a poisons and explosive precursor license looks like. They were very reluctant to release a blank copy of that because they thought I would be filling it in for all sorts of nefarious purposes. But we at least know what we're supposed to be looking for. And all these things are printed on specialist paper. Non-compliance with the law is a criminal offence, and a 3-month fine or 3 months imprisonment or a fine, and if it's Crown Court it's rather longer. One of the things that is the most common cause of problems is fire extinguishers. Most of the vans that seem to be running around either don't have a fire extinguisher in them or it's out of date, and that is a thing which is a very common occurrence. And if your vehicle is over 3.5 tons, you have to have more than one. But if you haven't got a fire extinguisher, you will get into trouble if you get stopped. So don't take your chemicals out of the original boxes. Make sure you store them in a clear container so you can see what's in there and what's in the back of the van. And no doubt next year we'll be here on these dates making the same points because it's apparent that the people here now haven't bothered to find out what legislation they should be following. But anyway, if you've got any questions, I'll be pleased to answer them.